I guess the best way to describe myself is I'm a person who's insatiably curious. I always am trying to find out new things. I'm interested in most things. And because of that, I like to speak to many, many people and hear what they're doing and how they're thinking. I grew up in Singapore, where I came from a very mixed background. And what that did for me was it brought me new ways of thinking and made me appreciate different perspectives. And that's something I always took with me through life. I ended up leaving Singapore to go to England to study law. I thought I'd be there for a couple of years. I ended up being there for 15 years, where I started my career first in finance. I was a trainee accountant at one of the FTSE companies, and I experienced very, very good soft skill training. They also funded my accounting degree. And so I moved on from that into big oil. I went to work for BP, not in the typical energy side, but really on the oil trading side, where I got exposed to a trading environment for the first time in my life. I had no idea before that what trading really was. And it was an environment of decision making, dealing with uncertainty, constantly wanting information and interrogating information to try and understand it better. And I found that to be something that I have sought and pursued through my entire career. Those days at BP set myself up as a business manager, COO on trading floors, which is what I then did for the next 15 years. I loved it, such a privilege. And I made my way through from BP into the banking world, and then from banks, I went into a sovereign wealth fund here in Singapore when I eventually came home to get closer to my family. And I hope to stay here for a few more years. But what's been interesting for me is, as I come up to a milestone birthday, I started to really question how I felt about delivering purpose and the kind of role model I wanted to be for my kids, the way I thought I was delivering value and if I had more to add. And so since that, the time where my whole career, I've worked in very large organizations with a lot of infrastructure and support around me, I'm now in the midst of developing a portfolio career where I'm trying to set up different employment streams, I suppose is the right way of saying it, to meet the different parts of my life that give me joy. So I'm being very entitled, very self-centered. I'm basically trying to create the job that doesn't exist, that does all the things I like doing. And I do accept with, in all jobs, there's some things that are less fun, but to make it as fun as I can. I think that the challenges I found were more around the nature of what I wanted to do than starting up a company itself. So starting a company, the infrastructure exists. If you're doing something that's reasonably, I don't want to say standard, but reasonably adopted in an industry, it's very easy to find help, very easy to get advice. What I'm trying to do is set up a company that also then potentially has multiple streams of business. But I personally am also potentially going to have multiple income streams, because my aim is to have a portfolio career. And so I talked about having the best of all worlds. There are certain benefits that come from large organizations where it's not always the priority when you start your own company. Examples I would give is, would you buy yourself medical insurance? It's the kind of thing where you may not, because as you're starting out and your budgets are tight, that might not be how you allocate your funds. And so the way I gave myself those protections and the way I prioritized, those were difficult decisions to make and actually reasonably structurally difficult to navigate. And so one of the things I'm talking to a few other people who've tried to do the same things about is creating a platform where people can find, specifically around portfolio careers, how we went about doing things and then feedback so we can improve it, because it is going to get easier. I think this way of working is going to become much more common. And so to tool people up so they can do it more easily is something I'd like to create. I think that there's actually been a lot of silver linings because of COVID. As you mentioned, right, it accelerated digital ways of working for many people. What I found really interesting is that all the tools and strategies and needs to work from home, as an example, or to digitize, existed before. What didn't exist before was an appetite to embrace it. And I've been fascinated as I've gone through the cycle of the first wave in Singapore of how many people really hated working from home. But how many people think that's the way they want to work for the rest of their lives? I learned two things from that very early stage of COVID. One is like there's often the way, but not the will. And so most companies do not readily adopt change where they don't see a need. And whether or not they see that need is totally down to the vision and commitment and dedication to the environment that their leadership team might have. The other thing that I realized was it doesn't always work for everyone. So the best example I actually had was with some trading managers in Hong Kong, where they had sent their juniors home to work because it was on lockdown. And the people in those homes, they just didn't have the space. They were having to share a dining table with a child and their partner, and they were trying to do focused work, and they just couldn't do it. And so they ended up, in some cases in Japan and in Hong Kong, going to public spots to do their work. And that creates other issues for companies. You have to worry about cybersecurity or real life security of your information. You have to think about the health of the people who are now sitting in a public space. So, I embrace work from home. I'm a big believer that in the future, it'll be a large part of our lives, but it's not going to work for everyone. And there are a lot of systemic things that potentially need to change, have nothing to do with the ways of working, but a lot more to do with how economies offer space, how economies choose to compete globally. I believe that our workforce will be distributed. And when our workforce becomes distributed, how do you skill your citizens and people to make them globally competitive? It's a much deeper question now than it used to be in the past. So, I think COVID has changed the way we all work, but it's also really potentially changing the way we need to think about the future. I think strategies might need to be reviewed. I think ecosystems may need to be reviewed. And I think that a lot of the core assumptions we have that are so embedded that we no longer see them as assumptions might need to be questioned. What I found was at the very start of COVID, when everything became very uncertain, I had a few proof of concept arrangements in negotiation or committed to. With COVID, people's appetite for experimentation shrank because there was so much uncertainty that unless the dollars were committed or the work had begun, most people just didn't want to start anything new, which I'm very sympathetic to and I think was actually the right decision. Had I been on the other side of the table, I would absolutely have done the same thing. I think what's been interesting has been how when people then came back, they almost come back swinging. So it's like the risk appetite is now higher than it was before. So where before people were very keen to take sort of controlled experiments, very much a rapid prototyping type of approach, they're now much more into the idea of something with a more of an impact, more of a big bang. And I think it might be driven by a sense of lost time because we haven't had, meaningful, I would say a march to maybe even now. We haven't been able to deliver quite a lot. Everyone's trying to get their KPIs met. And I feel like they're losing sight of the wood because of the trees. So that's one of the things I've noticed about that part of my business. The other part of my business is, as I mentioned, trying to create this alternative revenue stream model where it's really about consulting, coaching kind of work. What I find there's a lot of appetite for that. There's so much demand for coaching there, and that's a lot about coping, right? And helping yourself ready a person for the future. I also find that on the consulting side, it's a cheaper model towards having your headcounts and your workforce available. But it, of course, has an impact. So I can see the benefit to the organization where they now have more flexibility on headcounts and skills access. But for the people offering those skills, they have to think about the social safety nets that they might be trading off. So again, I mentioned healthcare before, but it's also things like pensions or stability, because contracts expire, then you have to go and hustle, and it's just a little bit more work. And the final thing I would also mention is I'm not entirely sure that the infrastructure, particularly in Asia, understands that kind of way of existing and caters to it. So the example I would give is, in some economies, it's punitive to have more than one stream of income from a tax perspective. And punitive is a strong word, but it's certainly not something that's envisioned at scale. In many places, the environment for freelancers is almost unfriendly. And so I think that's the kind of thing that potentially people need to look at. How do we support that kind of working as we go through the years? There's this running joke around, are you working from home or are you living at work? So I do encourage the people I know to create spaces and rituals and artifacts that help them. So for example, I have 2 young boys at home. They have loved this time. But one of the things they've loved about it is they get free access to me. So anytime one of them falls over and skins his knee, he'll come running into the room and they show me his knee. And I've had to teach them that, if I have my door shut and locked, you cannot come in. They know how to unlock my door. But I've said to them, you have to treat it like mommy's at work and not at home then, and find another adult to help you. Or if you're really, really in a bad way, knock on the door and I will come and open it. But don't barge in, particularly because these are young boys typically running around in their underwear. So I've had to teach them to respect those boundaries. And I've had the same thing with the other people in my household, which is there are certain circumstances where please don't walk in, but every other time, you're fine. I think that it's important, and even at work, I found this was important. I think it's important to have your artifacts that give you a little bit of, a personal touch and a bit of joy. I have a tea set, I've got a coffee subscription, which sends me drip bags, every month, and I never really know what I'm going to get, and it keeps me happy as I go through the month. So to create something personal to you in these spaces is also quite important. With regards to culture and engagement, there are a couple of things I like, but they very much depend on where you are. So what I mean is, if you use something along the lines of Microsoft Teams, where you have perpetual chat with video capability, I've always liked having a channel open. So I will have a video stream, and it could just be of me working. And I'm okay with being on camera because I'm not doing anything I don't want people to know I'm doing. But if I am about to get up and have a conversation with my child, or if I'm going to do something, I'll just turn off my camera and potentially cover it up. So making yourself available for communication, unless you really are not available, is to me something I would recommend. I also have been reasonably careful about ensuring there's some form of what I would call human touch or human contact. If you can meet in real life, I do a few coffees. I try and do my development conversations. I try and do my coaching conversations in that way. However, they don't always work, and there are times where you can't meet, in which case, I'm a big fan of bringing the frivolous into the serious. And so, I might set up a one-to-one coffee meeting, but what I might do is arrange for a coffee delivery. So if I'm talking to my team, I will send them a coffee, bubble tea or something for them to drink while we're on our call, and then we'll have a little bit of a laugh and joke around what I've said. Or if it's not possible, even because there were times where we couldn't even do that, I would say to them, all right, come with your favorite coffee mug. And then I want you to tell me why it's your favorite mug. Is it the way it feels? Is it what you see on it? Whatever. And something a bit personal and unimportant to just kind of give people that in a day, I find has been quite helpful. If you have a passion, a purpose, or an idea, just do it. Find a way to bring it into your life and make sure that it's compliant and it fits with everything else you're doing, but create space for something you care about. So I've been quite lucky. I've been able to run sort of experiments in the organizations I've worked in, but also where I couldn't. So for example, I care about education, but I've never worked in education. I was able to sit on the board of a school and, kind of get into it that way and learn about it that way. So if you care about something, bring it into your life and create space for it. Lesson I learned most recently, and probably too late in my career, I wish I'd learned it sooner, was the lesson of forgiveness. So, I've always worked in reasonably challenging and demanding environments, and I've always been quite good about forgiving other people when things didn't work out, because nobody tries to make mistakes, right? Mistakes happen, and being very conscious about how do we come up with a way to prevent this mistake from happening? What can we take from it? How do we protect ourselves for the future was natural. What was not natural was forgiving my own failures. And I was going to call them poor outcomes, but actually I corrected myself, because you learn from these things and the outcome is not poor. So, this idea of forgiveness, whether it's being more forgiving of your team because you have to develop them and not just expect them to be experts on day one, or more forgiving of yourself because you also have to learn, is a lesson that I think many people take a while to get to. And my last one, which is really not a career lesson, although mine, I have benefited from it. Surround yourself with people who love you, but not too much when it comes to making career and tough decisions. Because what you want is somebody who knows you well, cares that you're making a decision that's going to be good for you in the long term, but who can be tough on you. And when you start going down a route they may not fully agree with, or that could be done better, they are the people who will say, okay, did you think about X, Y, and Z? And if you still want to make your decision, still support you. And if it does go wrong, they'll be there for you regardless to help you pick the pieces up. And I think that community of people who care, but not too much, is actually quite key. Sometimes if they care too much, they won't give you the tough message, and that can be tricky. I try and find people's strengths, play to their strengths, and then stretch them on their weaknesses. And I don't expect them to thrive in their weaknesses. I expect them to learn the ways to deal with it better. I don't discourage people from strong debate. What I try and do is create an environment where it's safe to have that conversation, but then they go out and they leave that door as adults who've been able to put that moment behind them and move on with the next. And a lot of the ways we do that is we acknowledge whose decision it is that we will go with, and then we hold everyone, the entire team, accountable for supporting that decision, having heard the arguments to it. And one of the conversations we had was this new generation of women in the workforce. They didn't look at the role models that we offered and want to be like them. They actually wanted to, they were very grateful for the path that had been forged, but they wanted to forge their path in a slightly different way. And as I've seen that evolve, as those women have become more professionally mature and more influential in their own space and more confident in their own space, I've seen them achieve things that I haven't seen from men or women in their careers. The example I would give is there's a 32-year-old who I used to work with on the trading floor. And she recently was given a bonus number that she felt was lower than she deserved. And she went back to her managers and said, these are the 7 or 8 reasons why I believe I deserve better than this. Please take the number away and come back with something better for me. And in my career, I've experienced maybe 5 or 6 people who've done that, who've come up and said, I want more money. And what I haven't experienced is people who come and explain to you how you could have made a better decision and why. And so I was very struck by that. And I was having this conversation with one of my other girlfriends who was sharing similar stories of women who've really asserted themselves, but in a very constructive, very rounded way. And so I guess, my note for the new generation of female leaders is, do rise on the shoulders of those who went before you, do forge your own path, but also do it in a way that's your own, that works, that continues that journey, so that people don't become affronted and then reject this idea that you're taking people with you for the future. I really like how I'm seeing that in practice now.